Hello, everybody. Welcome. Um, I'm going to start off with some quick intros. We're here to talk about the far field modeling that went on, the far field modeling discussion that went on at City Council last week. My name is Beatriz. I have been living in Corpus Christi for over 15 years. I recently did the math. I thought I was here for 12 years, but it's been a minute. But I grew up in El Paso, Texas, and I'm a full-time organizer at Texas Campaign for the Environment. And I'll pass it off to Matt, just a short intro.
Thank you. Hi, everyone out there watching on whatever platform you're tuning in with right now. My name is Matt Tedrow. I grew up in Corpus Christi. I moved away. I came back sometime in 2018, I think. I've been a teacher and a media maker here at Corpus and Austin for about 20 years or so, you could take. And I started working with Chisme Collective, I guess about 2 months ago, something like that, right, Beats? And tonight I am very happy to be doing this, and I'm going to pass it off to Jason. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Hey, everyone. My name's Jason. I was born and raised here in Corpus Christi. Like Matt, I moved away for a little bit, but I've been back since around 2011. And basically, whenever I heard about Desal in January of last year, I started looking into it, and I found a lot of red flags, and I've just been kind of trying to raise awareness around those.
So yeah, Desal, the Great Unifier. Thanks for making the time. There was a lot that was discussed that was just really confusing. So I'm sure a lot of folks will appreciate this. So yeah, let's hop right into a little bit of background. Jason, how long have you and others been advocating for a far field model?
So I started advocating for a far field model probably like in February of last year, pretty shortly after I started learning about Desal here. But I'm pretty new to this discussion with like the community in the city. I feel like the community has been advocating for better modeling. I know Jim has. He was a city council member, way before me. So probably at least 4 years, I'd guess.
Nice. And what about yourself? I know we've been talking about it about a year. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of that trajectory?
Yeah. So I was trying to figure out like if there was any issues that, residents should be tuned into with desal. So I started reading like guidelines and literature about it. And hypoxia was kind of like one of the first things that popped up. And there's a scientist named Dr. Ben Hodges who had studied hypoxia here in Corpus Christi. And so I just emailed him and, he kind of explained his work a little bit better and why it's really important to do the far field modeling for desal here. Mostly it's because, we have a barrier island that blocks tides and tidal energy from coming into our bay, which makes it a lot more difficult to mix up and flush out the desal waste fast enough so that it doesn't accumulate or have negative environmental impacts.
So for folks at home, Jason, this conversation about desalination, it's unlike many of the other issues that we're dealing with at sort of a local political level, because there's a lot of like jargon and scientific expertise kind of baked into this conversation, right?
Right.
Do you think you could kind of go through what's really going on here, like what's at stake, kind of explaining what these different models are and why they matter?
Right. Okay. So
and I know you have some slides.
That's a lot.
I don't know if you want us to open those up yet or not, but
no. Basically, I think intuitively everyone has a pretty good idea that like desal in our like semi-enclosed bay system is a cause for concern. And so the reason it's important is because we have like natural resources and a coastal lifestyle, and it's important to make sure that we aren't degrading our natural resources, especially when there are viable options like taking it offshore available to us. And so I think it's just important to do the rigorous studies necessary to make sure that we're not negatively impacting the bays, right? And so I think some of the top concerns is hypoxia, which is low dissolved oxygen levels in the water. And the concern with that with desalination is that it concentrates the salinity in the bay when it removes fresh water out of the bay, or the water that it takes out of the bay. And then it discharges that concentrated brine into an area that may or may not be able to flush it out quick enough to avoid problems. And I think the other concern is the concentration of salinity and it being too concentrated in localized areas in our bay. It's tempting to say that desal adds salinity to the bay. And to an extent it does, because it brings in more seawater because you're taking, the desalinated water out of the system. But really the main concern is that you're concentrating it and releasing it into an area with poor mixing and sluggish waters. And you want to make sure that doesn't screw things up.
Thanks. So what's been the reasoning for the city not conducting a far field modeling so far?
Right.
So I read this there.
Yeah, so basically because the TCEQ doesn't require it and it's an extra expense, they could if they wanted to, if they wanted to listen to the concerns from community members and act upon it. I feel like they would have done far field modeling, but right now, they're just avoiding it at all costs, and they're avoiding it so hard it makes you wonder why they're going out of their way to avoid it so much, right?
Yeah. They finally caved earlier this year, I guess you can say, and they asked a private company in charge of the construction of the Inner Harbor desal plant, which is Kiewit, to hire a company to do the far field model. They hired GHD. So what changed earlier this year? Why did they decide to do it?
Honestly, that's a good question. I think ultimately the decision was up to Kiewit. And they had talked about it in their technical proposal. The reason that they gave was that the outfall for the desal plant, where they discharge the waste, it's pretty close to the intake. It's like 1,800 feet, and the intake is 10 feet higher. So it's really not that far away from itself. And since you're concentrating the salinity of the water that you're bringing in and releasing it, that means if the outfall gets into the intake, it's going to increase the salinity, which increases the salinity of the outfall. And then it just creates this loop of increasing salinities until it overwhelms the desal plant. So Kiewit did this limited far field study to make sure that doesn't get out of hand, basically, and make it unprofitable, but also they want to make sure they're not exceeding the TCEQ permit limits for the amount of effluent in the Inner Harbor.
Got it. So we reported about a year ago that a far field model conducted by the port actually killed one of their projects. And it sounds like the city is using their far field model, or I guess Kiewit, to justify this project just based on what was discussed at the last meeting. What's the main difference between the port's far field model and what GHD was able to produce?
So we don't know too much about GHD's modeling as of right now. Last week they talked about it for a good while, but there aren't, very many details at the end of the day. I know, big picture wise, that the port's model looked at the entire bay system. So it went from Gulf of Mexico to Corpus Christi Bay to Nueces Bay to Oso Bay, and it even went up. I forgot the bay that's north of us, and then Laguna Madra. Whereas the city's limited domain far field model only looks at the Inner Harbor water segment itself. So right up until it meets the Corpus Christi Bay, which is like a 8-mile stretch. That's the main differences.
Good. I'll put some links for folks just related to what was just covered. So moving on, during the July 15th City Council meeting, GHD said they can't release a report to council or the public on the far-field model that they conducted because it's proprietary information. It sounded like ultimately they agreed to release something. Will it be enough? And what should we be advocating for?
Yeah, so the way I took it is they don't want to hand over the model itself because that's kind of like their intellectual property. I guess the concern is if it was publicly available, then some other company could take that model and use it to develop their own desal plant in the Inner Harbor. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure they're going to give like a detailed report at some point. But what I think we should be advocating for is a pretty good like preliminary report right away, because there are votes at council that are happening. There's one next week where they're going to agree to take the design to 60%, and that's going to cost us $50 million. I feel like, we should have more details of the results of the study before then. But also the big vote at the end of the year, which is the guaranteed maximum price vote, once they do have that 60% design, we absolutely need that information out to council members, to the public. We need to get the model as much as possible, like independently verified by a local scientist at a university or like an independent engineering firm, and they have that information discussed and widely available at least a month before that vote at the end of the year. That way we know for sure, what we're signing up for, right?
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah. Well, Jason, you have some slides prepared for us. Do you want us to open those up and maybe you can kind of walk us through?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, let's do that actually. Beats, I'll cue it up here. I think I can just display on my machine.
Oh,
Cool.
Oh, is that mine? Is that yours or mine?
Mine.
Okay, here we go. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Take it away.
Cool. So the modeling happens in two phases. Basically, there's the near field and then there's the far field. So the near field is the first 500 feet from the outfall, not very much. And it's really simple. It's steady state, which means there's nothing like changing or fluctuating. There's no tides, there's no wind. There's nothing like that. Basically, it's like a giant empty aquarium with water and a simulated discharge. And they use that for permitting purposes to make sure that the effluent is at a reasonable dilution within a certain distance. The city updated their CorMix. CorMix is the software used for the near field modeling. They updated their diffuser design, and apparently it has 50% better dispersion now. But they didn't really say exactly what happened. And to me, that's kind of suspicious because it was a big change with few details. They changed it in 2023, and I'm not even happy with that change. I feel like they overstated the velocity or the ambient flow for the channel, which gave it better dilution rates. So that's something I'm looking out for. But basically, they redid the model for the near field. They said it looks great. It's better now. And they used that to feed into the far field model. And this picture on the right is the outfall. It's like a bunch of jets on a barrel. And what that does is it creates turbulent mixing for about 50 feet. So it dilutes fast. But then after that, it's diffusion, which is much slower. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see overview for the far field model. So like I said earlier, the domain is limited. You can see where it's like a light blue on the right middle, and then eventually that light blue stops. That's where the end of the domain is. And the beginning of it's far left, 8 miles, basically all the way to the Joe Fulton corridor. Normally, far field models are for bay-wide systems like ours because Corpus Christi Bay is known to be sluggish. It's known to have poor flushing. So you don't want to make too many assumptions about it, especially because those properties change throughout the year. Whereas the ocean's kind of like a monolith, and that would be an appropriate case to have a limited model if it was something connected to the ocean. But since we're separated from the ocean, or at least the inner harbor is by the Corpus Christi Bay, I think traditionally you would include the whole bay system out to the Gulf. Anyways, the far field model has numerous inputs: tide data, wind data, salinity from TCEQ measurements, and they ran it for a 1-year run period. The port on their model, they did a wet year and a dry year. And the dry year had a lot of salinity increases that were over the TCEQ limit for the inner harbor, because the ports model looked at like CC Polymers, La Quinta for the city. It included a lot of desal plants that have been proposed in the area. But basically, the result of the city's new far-field modeling is that there are minimal salinity increases to the Corpus Christi Bay. And I feel like a lot of that is from the new near-field modeling, which is better than the recent update from 2023, which I argue is should be thoroughly reviewed because I think that velocity data is wrong. But I'm going to keep going. On the next slide, it shows the results from the studies. And the first one is the intake salinity. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to look at how does the diffuser, where the wastewater is coming out, how does that interact with the intake salinity, right? So this is kind of a graph showing that. And basically you can see that the intake salinity, once desal is in operation, is about half a part per thousand to maybe 2 parts per thousand, higher than normal. And for me, this is a really interesting one because it's indicative of what the impacts to the Nueces Bay is going to be, because the Nueces Bay is connected to the inner harbor through a power plant that's about just as far away from the inner harbor's wastewater outfall as the inner harbor's intake is. So whatever you see here, you'll probably see going to the Nueces Bay, which is a huge concern because that's an ecologically important and sensitive bay. And at the very bottom, it says that if the salinity does go over 40 parts per thousand, that they will throttle production because that's too high for the process to run at full capacity and meet TCEQ permit limits. Okay, and then so the next slide shows the model results at the Harbor Bridge. So basically where it starts flowing into the Corpus Christi Bay. And by there really is no impact according to this new model, which, like I said earlier, is largely influenced by the new near field modeling that got fed into the far field model. But if you look at the top, it'll show salinity tolerances of different aquatic life in the Corpus Christi Bay. Just because a fish can tolerate a certain salinity range, having elevated salinity ranges that are above the optimum salinity range for a species can result in lower development, so like smaller fish, or just a harder time surviving throughout its life cycle. So if you just go by salinity tolerances, it's kind of misleading, I'd say. And there was a report from, I think, TAMUCC that said we're past our optimal salinity point, and basically any kind of salinity increase beyond that is just going to lower species diversity and ecological productivity. And so to kind of recap everything on the next slide, I just kind of pointed out some lingering issues. So the first one is like how they said that the model is proprietary, and we may not be able to look under the hood enough. And so I'd argue that if we can't really verify it, then it's not really worthwhile to us, and maybe we should kind of do our own modeling beyond this, because basically it's if they're not going to release the information, then we just have to move on and do it ourselves. I think it's important to know how accurate this model is before the important votes, especially the one at the end of the year. And ultimately, there's just still a lot we don't know, like, about the model setup, the results. We only got like 2 pictures, right? So it's not very much of a results. Part of the reason we did this whole modeling is for the intake and outfall interaction, to figure that out. And there was like 0 description of that process on Tuesday of last week, which is kind of strange. And I've talked to Jason from Priest and Nichols about it before, and the way they developed it, I feel like they cut a lot of corners and ended up using a static salinity throughout the whole run at the end of the day. And I think that kind of covers up some of the more intense impacts. And and they didn't talk about the impacts on Oasis Bay at all. So it's another red flag. And they started to talk about hypoxia, but they didn't really go to it too much. I would like to know what it's called stratification. Basically, it's like if it's super salty at the bottom, but not as salty at the top, it creates these layers, and it makes it harder for water to mix and for oxygen to get down to the bottom. And I would like to know more information about, how much stratification there is in the Inner Harbor. We didn't see any information like that. But basically, for me, there's 2 red flags. There was a major change to the near field model with no review, no information. I don't know. I feel like we really need to find out more about that. And I think we just need more details, especially before this vote. And I think we need to know a lot more about what the impacts in Oasis Bay are, because I think even with these really good results that they have, those impacts in Oasis Bay could be significant enough to modify the project or end it, I guess. But yeah, it's kind of my update on the modeling from last week.
Awesome.
Good.
Thank you for that. Yeah. At one point in the meeting on Tuesday last week, I forget if it was. I have to go back and look at my notes, but basically, the person speaking on behalf of the desal plant effectively said something along the lines of, "Well, if we don't act on this fast, it's going to the cost will continue to mount, right? It's going to be costlier as we go."
Right.
And it did seem like it was kind of a like a way to kind of like spark people, like, hey, quit dragging on desal, citing this plant, getting this thing rolling. In this conversation, there are other alternatives being proposed for other places to site a desalination plant, right? So.
Okay.
5 years ago, you and I have talked about this, but about 5 years ago, the Heart Research Institute here at A&M in Corpus Christi, they released a study looking at different options for desal plants, right? Inner Harbor was one of those. There was also one like on the island, right? And other places like that. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of these other options and maybe the thinking behind why this site, why the ship channel instead of anywhere else.
Cool. Yeah. So why the ship channel over anywhere else? I think it's just because it's down to cost. It's cheaper. So that study was commissioned by Friesen Nichols, who was in charge of developing the desal plant. And they asked scientists at TMUCC or Heart Research, I can't remember, to evaluate the 3 sites that they were looking at and nothing else. So they looked at La Quinta, which is in Ingleside, and that's in the ship channel. They looked at Inner Harbor, like you mentioned, and they looked at Barney Davis, which is in Flower Bluff. And basically they said, you can do a pilot plant at La Quinta and Inner Harbor, but don't do a full-scale one there because it will cause hypoxia due to low flushing and low mixing, even with diffusers. And then they recommended to go with Barney Davis and to take that offshore. Barney Davis is closer to the ocean, so it's a better site to take it offshore. If you're trying to go offshore from Inner Harbor, it's like a 26-mile pipeline, which is like, would be crazy expensive. La Quinta, I think, is about 10-ish miles. And then I think Barney Davis would probably be about 5 miles to take it offshore.
Is there a reasonable way to handle this piping stuff off that makes sense to you?
In what aspect?
Like dumping it back into the Inner Harbor, it's clearly problematic, right? But one of the proposals out there is to just pump it way offshore, right? Does that make sense to you in any of this conversation so far?
I think that is just the general recommendation from like the scientific community. I don't know too much about, the impacts to like ocean environment. I've been kind of more focused on estuary stuff, but since there are so many offshore desalination plants, it's like the norm, right? And I have a hard time finding articles or studies saying that it's had a significant negative impact on ocean environments. So I think that's a reasonable solution. Is it perfect? Probably not. But, if that's our best option, then I think we should go with that instead of going inshore.
Or we could stop industrial expansion and stop allowing a bunch of plants setting up shop here.
Or I'm saying if we need it, like for, actually need it, like we're running out of drinking water,
Right. Because they won't force them to curtail, and our freshwater reservoirs are running out, which is unfortunate. That's why we need desal.
Yeah, I asked this question because quite a few people have said that their main objection to desal locally is specifically where they're doing it. There's a lot of people who favor this, but they don't like how it's being handled, and that's part of what motivates me to ask that question. Looking at the chat here, we have folks saying it may or may not be safer, but it'll definitely be more expensive. Desal is unfortunately a false solution. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the sentiment has been that I think enough people are against the city continuing on this trajectory, but a lot of people are very aware that we are running out of water. And it's unfortunate that desal is the saving grace that's been heavily pursued by those who have financial interest in seeing the city grow in a particular way. So that's I just wanted to say my piece. So I think I'm out of questions, and we're coming up on time. Unless Matt, you have anything else?
No. I do want to thank Jason for spending the last half hour with us, and for everyone who tuned in and kind of decided to watch this conversation unfold. I hope we could do another live stream like this in the not too distant future with other people who are passionate about this topic. And yeah, that's all I got for tonight.
Cool. What about you, Jason? You got anything else for people out there watching?
Yeah. If you're concerned about desal, call your council member and let them know, and ask them to get CCW to release more information about this modeling, because we really need to make sure it's accurate before we start spending buco bucks on construction.
Bro, for sure. All right, y'all. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with more of these interviews in the future. Yep. Peace out. Bye.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all.